dispatches tonight how the terrible tragedy of Gloucester's Cromwell Street could have been avoided. As the jury gives its dramatic verdicts on Rosemary West, how could she and her husband have operated for so long undetected? In tonight's special extended edition, reporter Tanya Sillam reveals an extraordinary story of failures and omissions by each and every authority: the police, the school system, the social services, even the NSPCC. That's Dispatches. Behind the trial, behind the horror on The Shame of Cromwell Street.
It's easy for people to say now, you know, why didn't you do this, why didn't you do that? But probably next door neighbours were closer to them than what we were. And welfare workers, social workers, you know, where were all these people when the children didn't turn up at school and then didn't turn up at any school in the country? Where were they? No, I take a lot of the blame, myself and my whole family do. I'm speaking on behalf of my whole family. We all accept responsibility for this, or a certain part of it, but not all the responsibility. Surely there was someone out there, like I said, social, welfare, school teachers, no end of people who could or should have done something.
You look back and you think, well, if I had told someone, maybe it would have made it better. You know, she might still be here, or maybe it would have just made it worse or, you know, quicker. You know, you don't know, it just goes round and round in your head.
In spring 1994, 9 bodies were found in a terraced house in Gloucester. Their killers had been at large for 30 years. Tonight, Dispatches asked why it took so long to arrest them. There could hardly have been a less likely setting for mass murder than a small city on the edge of the Cotswolds. But the grim discoveries at Cromwell Street sounded the death knell for Gloucester's reputation as the quiet home of a county market. For 3 decades, the city authorities ignored a trail of clues and failed to protect their most vulnerable citizens. Just minutes from where Gloucestershire's livestock is sold for slaughter, an altogether different kind of butchery was carried out without anyone noticing.
Gloucestershire is a very, very interesting county. The forest tie has got silver, corn and green. You've got the Forest of Dean, you've got the Cotswolds where I had the good fortune to serve most of my service, and you've got the Berkeley Vale where my father-in-law used to hunt with Captain Berkeley and all that. The forest, you haven't found your way down there, have you? They're a race apart. They're neither Welsh nor bloody English. And down there, incest is rife. You know, they say, you know, why bother to go outside the family for sex when you've got your own bloody family? And sex is almost, incest is almost endemic down there. Not so much today as it used to be, you know.
A few miles north of Gloucester lies the birthplace of Frederick Walter Stephen West. On the 29th of September 1941, he was born into a family of fruit pickers at Bickerton Cottage. He was remarkable only for his close relationship with his mother. It's now said that Daisy West showed an unnatural affection for her son. Doug and Christine West still live in Muchmarcle. What do you remember of Fred from those years? What kind of older brother was he to you?
You could say he was a bit the blue-eyed boy because he was the oldest, which is the case in most families. The oldest always seems to be able to get away with certain things. But, I mean, if he was in the wrong, well, he got punished the same as the rest of us.
In his teens, Fred West started to pester girls. In 1961, at the age of 20, he was charged with the sexual abuse of a 13-year-old. The girl became pregnant but refused to name the father, and Fred West was acquitted. But a criminal career was not far off. Within months, Fred West had met and married his first wife. Catherine Costello, known as Rena, was from Glasgow. She was already pregnant by another man, and in 1963 gave birth to a daughter called Charmaine. A year later, she bore Fred West a child, who was christened Anne-Marie. In 1963, Fred and Rena had moved to a corporation flat in her home city of Glasgow. But Fred became violent, and Rena began an affair with a neighbour.
When I was going with her and we went to bed at night, I seen marks on her body that shouldn't have been there. You know what I mean? Places. He just kicked her between her legs and various other places. Her breasts. In fact, she went down to Scotland Street police station, charged on one time, but they put it in as a domestic argument.
By the end of the decade, his attacks would turn to murder. In 1965, the Wests moved south to a caravan near Hereford.
I rented a caravan at the other end of the site from where Fred had his caravan. Well, you know, he was a nice bloke, friendly, outgoing. He drove a septic wagon tanker. He showed me these pictures and some abortion equipment, which he said was abortion equipment. I mean, you know, I'd never seen any before. He said that if I knew any girls who wanted an abortion, you know, he'd give me a few quid if I brought them out to him, like, you know. The only thing that did strike me odd all the time was this offering girls jobs as nannies. I mean, he wasn't wealthy enough for that. He's just a working Joe, as far as I knew.
Fred West's first known victim was an 18-year-old nanny called Anne McFall. By 1967, Rena had drifted off the scene and Anne McFall became pregnant by Fred. But in that year, she disappeared. Her body would be found in Fingerpost Field, Muchmarkel, 27 years later. Rena, meanwhile, had become a prostitute. In 1969, she was arrested for soliciting in Bristol and was only seen again once more. She was killed by Fred West and buried in the letterbox field where he'd worked as a farm labourer. In the mid-1960s, the plight of Charmaine and Anne-Marie West was concerning welfare officers from the local council. They'd both spent a short period in care under Hereford Children's Department. But astonishingly, Hereford failed to pass on vital information about Fred West's 1961 abuse charge when the family moved just a few miles across the county border to Gloucestershire. It was the first major omission by the authorities. The county councils involved refused to be interviewed by dispatches during the making of this documentary, so we asked an independent and highly respected childcare expert for his assessment. Norman Warner chaired the government's 1992 inquiry into children's homes.
You would expect Gloucester's Children's Department to actually make inquiries of a previous Children's Department who had relationships with that family. You would then expect Hereford Children's Department to pass all the information they had about that family that would give them concerns to Gloucester Children's Department, so that Children's Department in Gloucester could take proper account of all the dangers that those children might be exposed to.
In the late 1960s, a family called Letts had moved to Gloucestershire from Devon. Of 7 children, Rosemary Pauline was the 5th. She'd grow up to partner West in his unparalleled career of rape and murder. 13 years his junior, she'd embark on a relationship with him after a chance encounter at a bus stop.
I think Rosemary was 15, coming up to 16 at the time she met him. She actually left home at 16 and went off with him. There was a lot of upset in the family because my father was against it, dead against it from the beginning.
Bill Letts, who later committed incest with Rose, put her into care to try to stop her seeing Fred West. But it didn't work. Then the couple moved to 25 Midland Road in Gloucester. Within months, West was imprisoned for stealing. Rose, who was just 16, was left looking after the 2 children, Charmaine, aged 7, and her stepsister, Anne-Marie, who was 6. Amazingly, though Rose, Charmaine and Anne-Marie had all been in care, there was no intervention by Gloucestershire Children's Department.
My sister was a young girl. She obviously didn't know what married life was all about, and the place wasn't as clean as you'd like it to be, but I mean, these were all things, the wallpaper wasn't too good, it was, you know, it was a bit drab, to be quite honest with you.
I looked at her and I thought, my God, she looked about 14 years, you know, she looked very young, 14 years of age. I wouldn't have took her no more. Very pretty little girl she was, as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't believe that it was his wife.
But within months, Rena's child, Charmaine, was out of control. She was being restrained and beaten by Rose. In June 1971, Charmaine made her last appearance at school and was never seen again. Her remains wouldn't be recovered from beneath the Midland Road kitchen for 1/4 of a century.
My mother pushed to get an answer off of Fred as to where she was. And we were told that they'd cleared off back to their original mother and cleared off.
She'd gone back to Scotland.
And that they'd gone up to Scotland to live.
As is the case to this day, Charmaine's school was under no obligation to check that a pupil had registered elsewhere. Charmaine was never reported missing. By 1972, Fred and Rose West had moved across the park to a house in Cromwell Street, where they started to rent out rooms. It soon became known as a shelter for young homeless people.
It was a bedsit area, not particularly salubrious, attracting people passing through the city. A lot of people would be on social security and that type of, those type of people, mostly, not exclusively.
You'd see a girl there the one day, and it was mostly young women that were living in the flats, in the bedsits. So they were like, here, 2 or 3 months they might stay, couple of weeks here, gone one, gone done.
A friend of mine, she suggested that I'd go and see Fred and Rosemary West. Well, I mean, I'd had a disagreement with my parents, and I didn't know whether to knock the door or what. And I sat on the wall as Mr. West came out to me, and he asked me why I was crying, and I said that I'd had nowhere to live. So he proposed that I could live there.
There'd be a knock at the door, and there was an entourage of people in and out of the house, and he was always taking in these waifs and strays, as it were, you know, the young girls who were nowhere to live. And sort of privately to ourselves, we used to say, there's something going on there, you know, is he running a brothel or what? Well, it always
yeah.
seemed busy. I mean, you
Well-
go there on a Sunday, and I mean, there was always somebody knocking on the door. Either somebody down the street wanted some repairs done or something, or somebody come to see Rose, but then if they come to see Rose, you didn't see who it was, because that was her business.
The Wests became increasingly promiscuous. As well as rooms, Fred West also advertised his wife.
Another doorbell appeared with the name Mandy written on it. And that, if you rung it up the stairs, not to where the children's area was.
What did you deduce from that?
Pardon?
What did you deduce from that?
That it was Rose. You know, we talked about it, didn't we? We gathered that Rose was being a prostitute.
The Wests started recruiting young girls and would drive round Gloucester looking for runaways.
She said, when he's got a woman companion with him, it makes it easier for the victim if they go and pick up a girl. Because Rose is with them, she doesn't hesitate to say no because there's a woman and a bloke in a van.
In December 1972, the approaches turned violent. The Wests would commit a crime that should have made them suspects in any similar attack thereafter. In December 1972, Fred and Rose West abducted 17-year-old Caroline Owens from the roadside near Gloucester. She was taken back to 25 Cromwell Street, gagged, bound and raped. The brutality of the attack on Caroline Owens is remembered to this day by those who knew her.
When I first saw her, the marks on her body were amazing. She showed me all the bruises on her legs and on her back, and there was bits of hair missing off it. She was in a really bad state. Probably 50% of her body was bruises and lines and wales of where they had been hitting her.
The attack made national headlines, but the police in Gloucester told Caroline Owens that if she dropped rape charges, the Wests would plead guilty to a lesser charge. She agreed, and the Wests were fined £50 each. Their case still haunts the magistrate John Smith, who now says he regrets not sending West to prison. But do you think the police should have persuaded her?
I think the police should have got Fred West and his wife and had them locked up straight away in a lunatic asylum and saved umpteen young girls' lives.
The abduction of Caroline Owens was to be a blueprint for the West's assaults on young women. But police should also have spotted a striking similarity to a roadside disappearance just 5 years earlier in 1968.
Mary Bastholm never reached the village of Hardwick, and the last that was seen of her was at this bus stop on the main A38 road. Following her disappearance, police organised a massive search.
Mary Bastholm had been seen in Fred West's car. 300 officers joined a search but never found her body. Incredibly, West was never questioned, even though Gloucester police already had descriptions of a lone motorist from 3 other young women he'd attacked in the previous 2 years. Decades later, West would confess to the killing of Mary Bastholm. In December 1973, there was yet another disappearance. 21-year-old Lucy Partington had been waiting for a bus near Cheltenham. Despite another massive search, Fred West was never questioned, even though it was only a year since he'd pleaded guilty to the horrendous attack on Caroline Owens. It had been many years before police linked Lucy Partington to the other girls when they recovered her body from West's house.
There certainly didn't at the time just be any direct link between the girl Bastholm and the girl Partington. The one girl possibly would have accepted a lift, but the girl Partington, it seemed highly improbable that she would have got into a car with a stranger.
Yet newspapers had linked Partington's disappearance not only with Bastholm, but also with Carol Ann Cooper, who'd vanished just 1 month earlier over the county border in Worcester. She'd last been seen boarding a bus at this stop one evening. Again, she fitted a pattern already reported to the Gloucester police. When another 15-year-old, Shirley Hubbard, vanished a year later, journalists again linked her case to the others. But there was still no joint investigation between the county forces.
On the evening news in Worcester, we were making these links that we had another disappearance, and we had the disappearance of 12 months before, and the disappearance of 12 months and 2 months before. If we're actually resurrecting those stories and saying we have another disappearance, inexplicable, surely a police force has got to say, yes, there seems to be no links, but maybe we should actually go off and think laterally here.
Would Gloucester at the time have received that kind of county information from Worcester about the disappearances in Worcester?
I would certainly have imagined so, yeah.
So why do you think they didn't, at the time, link these disappearances?
I have no idea. Each disappearance was thoroughly investigated, but people have always gone missing. There's always been problems, particularly with teenagers running away from home, the bright city lights and things like that. This is nothing new.
By 1975, the suspicions of the police should have been aroused by the pattern of attacks and disappearances from the roadside. Out of 4 heavily publicised disappearances, 3 had been from bus stops. And of 6 other attacks, 5 had occurred by the roadside within 50 miles of Gloucester. All the women described to police a man who'd later be identified as Fred West. At the same time, a trail of clues led to Cromwell Street. On several occasions, the police had reason to visit the house, but on each were successfully diverted by the Wests. In April 1973, 19-year-old Linda Goff disappeared while living there. Her mother June traced her to Cromwell Street and reported to police that she'd found Rose West wearing her daughter's slippers. But it would be 17 years before they found Linda Goff, buried 6 feet beneath the bathroom. Around the same time, there were raids on the house by the drug squad. But attention was focused on the tenants rather than the landlord, and the searches retrieved nothing more significant than small quantities of cannabis. And even though Fred West had been arrested for attacking Caroline Owens in the same period, police never intervened to protect the West children. Caroline Owens had specifically warned police that 9-year-old Anne-Marie was at risk, but social workers were never told.
One would have expected, I have to say, that the police would have actually made doubly sure by passing information about the case and any concerns they might have to the Social Services Department. But leaving aside the police, one would have expected general alertness from the press coverage and media coverage of the case to have triggered some mechanisms within the Social Services Department to at least check out whether the children were in any way at risk.
Anne-Marie had already been raped by her father and stepmother by the age of 8.
He turned around and said to me, we just had to rush Anna at the hospital. I said, well, whatever for? He said, they were called chopper bikes. They had the big wheels and you had the gears in the front. Hers had a red ball to change the gears. He said she slipped and the ball went right up inside her, drawed blood. He said we had to take her to the hospital and things like that. And I said, is she all right? He said, yeah. She's slightly grazed up inside, but the hospital thinks that she will be all right.
It seems that Gloucester Royal Hospital didn't find the injury suspicious, even though it would have been sufficient grounds to place a child on an at-risk register. Anne-Marie never received that protection, despite later treatment for a head wound inflicted by Rose West and the suspicions of another doctor about scratch marks on her body. If a doctor had evidence of child abuse and the doctors on separate occasions did not refer that either to the police or to social services, would they have been doing the wrong thing or the right thing?
In my opinion, they've been doing the wrong thing.
What should they have done, do you think?
Well, I'm only concerned with the welfare of the child, and if the child was still exposed to danger, that danger still existed. I think the doctor was failing the child.
Incredibly, a teacher at Anne-Marie's school in Gloucester had also noticed bruising on her. But even though a welfare officer was sent to 25 Cromwell Street, nothing happened.
By the time we get to 1973, we've actually got a celebrated national case, the Maria Colwell case, which exposes great concerns about how all agencies work together to actually protect children. And there is a high level of consciousness being raised amongst doctors, amongst teachers, amongst social services department, amongst police forces, about them all needing to work together and share information which give clues as to possible abuse of children, particularly physical abuse. And in those circumstances, you would start to expect social services departments and the other agencies to be concerned about clues about physical abuse or maltreatment of children.
Gloucester's public agencies had been organised into an area review committee to improve communication. But though the police, county council and Royal Hospital all had information about the West family, they failed to share it. Social services had care records for Anne-Marie, Charmaine, and even their stepmother Rose Letts as she was then. There were school records for Anne-Marie showing bruising, and for 8-year-old Charmaine, who'd suddenly vanished. Furthermore, Gloucester Royal Hospital had evidence of the sexual abuse of Anne-Marie, who'd been treated for a number of sexual injuries. A doctor had become suspicious. At the same time, police should have been alerted by the rape of Caroline Owens, June Goff's search for her missing daughter, and raids on the lodgers by the drug squad. Furthermore, 5 young girls had disappeared with public appeals for 4 of them, and at least 7 other roadside attacks had been reported to the police. Fred West also had a lengthening criminal record, showing not only that he'd served a prison sentence, but appeared in court no less than 10 times, including for the attack on Caroline Owens. If Gloucester police had connected the roadside disappearances, they might also have noticed that 6 missing girls had been in institutions like this former children's home. Fred West preyed on vulnerable and insecure young girls in care. Cromwell Street became well known on the grapevine for welcoming runaways. With few family ties, such girls were less likely to be missed.
Rosemary West, she'd been in care herself. So, I mean, she probably knew all the loopholes there were.
Alison Chambers had run away from home since she was 14. Her mother lost control of her.
Sometimes she just wouldn't come home at all. And we would have to phone the police. And sometimes my husband would come home from work and he would have to go straight out to see if he could find Alison. So I had her put into care for what I thought was her own safety.
But the isolation and padded cells of her former children's home could not keep her there, and she continued to run away.
I didn't know very much about social services anyway. So I thought that once she got into care, that they would be able to keep a bit better eye on her than I did. And that perhaps she wouldn't want to run away.
Alison Chambers' records show she continued to abscond. She ran away 9 times in the 8 months she was at Jordensbrook House in Gloucester. Eventually, in August 1979, straight into the arms of Rose and Fred West. As the Wests had calculated, the authorities simply discharged her when she didn't return.
The last letter I had from Alison was September 79. No address, just saying that she was living with this family. She was happy and not to worry about her, and that she would write again.
Half West's known victims had passed through institutions. 15-year-old Shirley Hubbard had been in care since the age of 2. She was also a runaway. Carol Ann Cooper had been in a children's home since she was 13. Shirley Robinson spent almost her entire life in the care of social services. She was 8.5 months pregnant by West when she was killed. And Juanita Mott had also been in care. She too fitted the pattern of a rebellious runaway, seeking affection where her family links had broken down. Her sister Belinda always thought she'd come home.
Juanita was the outgoing one, the life and soul of the party. She'd just go off and come back whenever she wanted. It might be a week, it might be 2 weeks, then it'd get to a month. But my mum always said, oh, she'll come back one day. She'll come back when she's got no money. When she's got nowhere to stay, she'll be back. But time went on, and she just didn't turn up.
I was at Woolworths working in the basement, and I can remember when it coming down the escalators, and the till was just round the corner from the escalators, and she walked over and she wanted to look at my engagement ring, because I just got engaged. And she had a look at it and she said, I'm running away. And I said, what are you on about? She said, I'm running. I said, don't be stupid and wait a minute. Of course, I wasn't allowed to get off the till. And the next thing I seen was her walking off, going up the escalators, and that was the last time I saw her.
Juanita Mott had heard there were rooms at 25 Cromwell Street, and after April 1975, she was never seen again. Her grave awaits its headstone in a Gloucester cemetery 20 years after her death. By 1975, 9 girls had disappeared. But for Anne-Marie and Heather West, the nightmare was only just beginning. By 1980, 25 Cromwell Street was filled not only with lodgers, but 6 of the West's own children. Anne-Marie, Heather, May and Stephen were all being abused. They were living alongside the gruesome remains of 7 of the victims. 5 had been buried in the cellar, later located by Fred West for police. At the time, he decided to cement it over and use it for the children.
He saw it was the right thing to do to adapt the cellar to a playroom and that the children had their breakfast and then went down there from underfoot for the rest of the morning, then came up for their lunch. It seemed strange that you should have sort of all these bunk beds set up in a room for sort of 4 or 5 children to sleep in, whilst you were letting rooms to teenage girls.
They behaved like normal children up to a certain point. They were lovely, beautiful kids, all of them. And but you always got this feeling that, again, that maybe they had been threatened.
Anne-Marie West was then in her mid-teens. In 1979, she'd been absent from school for 68 days. And though she'd become disruptive in class, no one suspected abuse.
She mentioned one occasion when Rose was in bed with him. Another occasion when Fred was having sex with her and somebody was watching. There was one occasion that she swung around and mentioned where she was basically spread-eagled up against a wall.
When she was 15, Fred West took Anne-Marie to hospital with an ectopic pregnancy. She was underage and had therefore suffered criminal sexual abuse. Had doctors interviewed her alone, they might have discovered that Fred West was the father.
I think if a hospital is seeing a child on a consistent basis with concerns about their sexual activity, their sexual health, their sexual welfare, and the child is underage and has clearly been engaging in sexual activities of one kind or another for some period of time underage, those are good grounds to regard that child as at risk. And certainly in 1980, they're good grounds for actually the case to be referred to the Social Services Department so that at least all the agencies can hold a case conference and decide what, if anything, should be done to protect the particular child.
But despite the hospital's growing records on Anne-Marie's sexual injuries, there was no intervention from social workers or the police. By 1984, 14-year-old Heather West was also being sexually abused. Again, the authorities failed to protect her.
When she actually broke down and told me what was going on, it was actually at school, because we didn't see her out of school, and she just cried, you know, at first. It was, and led up to it, we weren't talking about anything that might upset her or anything, she just cried. You know, I sat there and I cried with her. I just didn't think any people could be so wicked, you know.
She came up and asked if she could come up and sit and talk like that. Fine. And I said, what's the matter? She said, I'm unhappy. I said, I know you're unhappy, but, you know, what? She said, I'm thinking of buggering off to the forest.
It was in the, I think it was in the forest of Dean. We went there camping for a few days, and she was fine. Towards the end, last few days, she disappeared. One of the teachers had to go after her. Why she, you know, decided to take off, I don't know. One of the teachers questioned her about it and she stormed out of there. But yeah, she questioned her about the bruising, because it was quite obvious. You couldn't miss it, really. You know, it was like hand grip bruises.
Former teachers at Hucklecote School appear to have accepted Heather's explanation that the bruises were from play fighting. And yet her behaviour had become so disruptive that she was even suspended. By the mid-1980s, she'd started rebelling against her parents too.
The more digs that that Fred made to her, the more things that were said about her leaving or having a boyfriend or anything else, the more determined she got. And I believe in the end that is probably what killed her, because I've got the feeling that Fred, this was Fred's way of shutting people up.
Mae West, who was 15, tried to interest her teachers in Heather's disappearance, but to no avail. Her sister's body wouldn't be found for another 7 years. Gloucestershire County Council had had an opportunity to intervene in the family just 2 years before Heather's death. But nothing came of a meeting with the Wests in 1985 after a tip-off about Rose West's prostitution. 3 years later, a social worker called round to Cromwell Street in 1988 after a warning about child abuse from a client of Rose West's. But even though Heather was by this time unaccounted for, nothing was found to be amiss. By the late 1980s, child abuse cases had prompted national and local guidelines. But despite the high state of alert, the social worker also failed to spot that Stephen West, then 15, was also showing signs of physical abuse.
Stephen came up to the bedsit one day, a funny sort of mood. Apparently Rose had strapped him to the toilet and then laid into him with a belt. He was obviously in discomfort, but after a couple of days he just brushed it off as one of those things.
A teacher at Stephen's school in Gloucester did report bruising to the NSPCC, which had set up an abuse investigation unit. Incredibly, after 4 meetings, they closed Stephen's file in June 1989, saying no risk was perceived. By the end of the 1980s, separate authorities in the city had accumulated a vast wealth of information about the West family. But individual agencies like Gloucestershire County Council were still not sharing it. To records which went back to the 1960s was now added Heather's troubled school record, as well as Anne-Marie's. Social services had received warnings about prostitution and abuse. A school had ignored concern about Heather's disappearance, and another had been warned that Stephen West was being abused. And as if the hospital didn't already have enough evidence that Anne-Marie was being sexually abused, there was now her underage pregnancy. The police, already alerted to West and to disappearances and attacks in the area, now listed 11 convictions for him. And finally, the NSPCC had opened and closed a file on Stephen West. If the authorities had shared their information, West's activities would have been halted much earlier.
One is left with a very real concern that evidence is not accumulated and weighed and evaluated so that action can be taken when there is a full picture of concerns about a particular family and particular children within that family. One is struck by an almost casualness about the way agencies do and don't pass information between each other. And we are left, or I'm left with a sense that perhaps there's a level of distrust between the agencies so that they aren't willing to share information with each other in order to protect the children in families at risk.
But it would still be another 4 years before the authorities intervened. The beginning of the end came in 1992, when some children reported the Wests for abuse. Fred and Rose West were arrested and charged, but within a year they'd been granted a final reprieve and the case collapsed. Anne-Marie West, a crucial witness, withdrew her evidence. She'd later cite fear of Rose West, who was on bail, and blame the authorities for failing to protect her. 8 months later, the police would intervene again.
At 11:15 a.m. today, a 52-year-old Gloucester man was charged with 5 separate charges relating to murder of unknown females.
Armed with a confession from Fred West, the police started to peel back layers of building work at 25 Cromwell Street. Beneath the bathroom, the cellar and the patio, they recovered the remains of 9 women. The bodies of a child and 2 other women were found at other locations. But on New Year's Day 1995, Fred West eluded the authorities once more. One of the worst serial killers this century was found hanged in an ordinary cell at Winson Green Prison in Birmingham. Today in Winchester, Rose West was found guilty on 10 counts of murder. At the age of 41, she'd been killing for over half her life. She returned to jail, facing 10 life sentences, still protesting her innocence. As the verdict was delivered, Gloucestershire County Council ended months of silence to deliver its own independent inquiry to the press. But even though it cost £1 million, the inquiry team hadn't read the actual files or interviewed any of the staff involved, accepting instead the agency's own reports. Crucially, though, the Bridge report is critical of the agency's failure to share information on the family, although Gloucestershire County Council said today it had been vindicated.
The broad lesson is that there was nothing that we could have done, and in fact nothing that any child protection age service in the United Kingdom could have done to anticipate or prevent this set of tragedies. They received their first information about any form of child abuse in this family in 1992. They reacted like lightning, and within 4 days they had those 5 children in care, and they then provided care which the Bridge Agency says was salutary.
The Bridge report says there were worrying signs hidden in the family's medical notes, but today health officials were defending hospital practice.
If you look at what happened then, the hospital staff who were engaged then followed fairly normal practices and procedures for that time in dealing with the individual who presented to the hospital. They took pains to establish the circumstances, to satisfy themselves, and were given very plausible explanations for the presenting circumstances that person went to hospital for. The key message for us for now is not to look at what staff did in 1973 or 1980, but to look at what staff are doing now in 1995.
The NSPCC admitted that it had lost its file on Stephen West, but said it didn't have enough information at the time to act.
I don't think there's any organisation, any agency who had any kind of contact with that family who doesn't long for being able to say that they did something to identify it and stop all of those events.
The Bridge report is highly critical of the decision not to imprison the Wests over the rape of Caroline Owens, though Gloucestershire Police said today its own procedures had now changed.
Well, hindsight, of course, is pretty precise, and I think we've got to look, though, at the facts as they were. We're cataloguing over a period of 22 years a series of horrendous crimes. But when we ask ourselves what was known to the authorities, what information did we have to investigate, it's next to nothing. So I think that, yes, we may be concerned about something that happened 20, 25 years ago, but I think the main message for the public today is that the procedures we have in place at the moment have stood a test. Indeed, it is because of those procedures that we've had a successful prosecution today.
Most astonishingly, the Bridge report finds that 22 young girls from the former Gloucester Children's Home, Jordensbrook House, are still missing. Furthermore, police today released the names of 9 women they say they're unable to trace. Their search may end where the West story began 30 years ago in Glasgow.
Excuse me. The ice cream van belonged to Walls Ice Cream, and they hired it out for her. And the name it was Mr. Whippy. And it started off for the end of McClellan Street. No, but actually his own close was right over to the south side of Glasgow, which is where he used to come from before, Savoy Street, and that's over the Godballs area, and that was his run. And he knew a few girls over there, because I'd been on the van a couple of times when he used to chat birds up, something terrible. Did. That wasn't real. The spatter used to come at me, you know. And then I found out about that as well. And there's four girls from that area. It's just disappeared off the face of the earth.
If Fred West had an epitaph, it would be that he took the full truth with him to his grave. For people who spoke to West while in custody, say he confessed to killing not just a further 4 women, but an additional 20. For decades, a Gloucester builder and his wife raped, attacked and murdered women with such impunity that the full extent of their crimes may never be known. Those left behind are racked with guilt.
She literally begged me not to say anything. Don't say anything, I'll get into trouble, it'll get worse. And so I promised her I wouldn't, you know, say anything. You know, that's something I gotta live with now, knowing that, you know, if I had gone and told someone, I mean, being the age I was, would they believe me?
She was the only best friend I ever had. I have friends, but no one like Winnie. And that's just why I miss her so much.
She could have gone on drugs, she could have been a prostitute, she could have been anything, just so long as she was still alive today. I wouldn't have cared.
The children were always cared for very well. They never looked down and out. So at the end of the day, we didn't think we were in a position to judge somebody else.
But it was the authorities who ignored disappearances, dismissed assaults, and failed to identify abuse. In the end, the terror was halted not by an official body, but by a child pleading for protection from her own parents.